She laughed at me right in front of 100 guests, pointed her finger and said, "Look, the miserable guy came alone. No one will ever love him." Everyone around chuckled. Some even smirked openly, and I stood off to the side like a shadow. But just a few minutes later, when the priest lifted his eyes and solemnly declared, "And now I announce the real groom," silence fell over the hall, and everything turned upside down in an instant. Subscribe, like, and leave a comment. You won't want to miss what happened next. It was a Saturday, one of those bright days when everything around feels like it's woven out of celebration. The air smelled of expensive flowers and champagne. The tables sparkled with porcelain. Waiters moved quietly, and the guests, polished, elegant, dressed in their finest suits and gowns, laughed and chatted. The wedding hall glowed with golden light, and in the center, under a high arch of roses, she stood Laura. I looked at her and realized that once I knew every smile, every gesture of hers, but now I saw a stranger. I stood closer to the back rows like a random observer. No one paid much attention to me, but I could feel the glances, full of quiet mockery. Some whispered to their neighbors about losers in life. Some smirked, looking my way. I felt as if the whole hall, with its gilded columns, bright chandeliers, and ringing laughter, breathed with one mood. He doesn't belong here, and I didn't argue. I stayed silent. Inside, everything boiled: bitterness, cold anger, memories of how it all went wrong. But outside I was motionless, like a statue. That's when she noticed me. Laura turned her head, looked straight at me, and without hesitation, said aloud, "Well, look at that, he showed up. Did you even buy that suit? Or did you rent it again?" The guests around her burst out laughing, loudly, deliberately, so I could hear every echo. One of the men slapped the table with his palm, shaking his head, and the bridesmaid theatrically covered her mouth as if she couldn't hold back her laughter. All eyes turned to me, and I felt the weight of 100 people's attention burning like a spotlight. I didn't respond. I just stood there, staring straight into her eyes. She expected me to break, to start defending myself, or at least to look away. But I didn't move, didn't speak a word. And in that silence, which suddenly hung between her laughter and my stillness, I thought some of the guests began to sense. Something here was off. I knew. The time hadn't come yet. All I needed to do was wait. Cold, calm, silent. The hall shimmered with light, chandeliers spilling gold across the polished floor, while the murmur of voices rolled like a tide. I could hear champagne glasses clinking, silverware brushing porcelain, whispers of gossip weaving through laughter. My place remained in the shadows at the back, where the air was cooler, away from the blaze of admiration she basked in. Laura moved like a queen in her gown, the fabric trailing behind her as though the world itself bowed to her steps. The guests adored her, or at least pretended to. She had that ability to draw eyes, to make people forget where they were. And she loved it. Loved the attention, the spotlight, the power of making others feel small. She turned that power on me the moment I entered. It wasn't enough for her to be adored. She needed me humiliated. Each time she glanced my way, her lips curled into a smirk, and she would whisper something to the friend beside her. Their laughter carried, sharp and cutting. I stood like an island, letting it crash against me. Inside, I replayed the months that led me here, each moment tightening like a noose. There had been signs, cracks that widened too quickly to ignore. Late-night calls she brushed off as business. Sudden outings that left no trace, no explanation. I had asked once, twice, then stopped asking altogether. Silence revealed more than her words ever could. The night I found the truth, I said nothing. No anger, no confrontation, only the cold decision to wait. And now, in this hall dressed with roses and gold, my silence remained my shield. The crowd's mood shifted gradually. At first, laughter rang freely, but as minutes passed, I noticed eyes flicking between us. Some guests whispered with furrowed brows. Others forced their chuckles too loudly, as though covering unease. Even in her radiance, Laura's voice grew sharper. She mocked me again, this time louder, pointing so others could not miss. "It's funny, isn't it?" she said. "Some men just don't know when to disappear." The room erupted once more, though not as fully as before. I caught the hesitation. A groom-to-be stood beside her, tall, well-dressed, his hand nervously tugging at his cuff. He laughed too, but the sound lacked conviction. He tried to keep his eyes on Laura, but they flickered toward me, uneasy, searching. I remained still, unmoved. The priest, an older man with a voice like gravel softened by years of sermons, cleared his throat and raised a hand for calm. The chatter died slowly, reluctantly, until the hall echoed with nothing but the rustle of gowns and the faint hum of the air conditioner. Laura clasped her hands together, beaming at the crowd, certain of her moment. But I noticed the tremor in her fingers. I studied her the way one studies a painting, every detail telling a story, every shadow betraying a truth. The friends who once laughed with her now leaned closer, whispering questions. Even they sensed something had shifted, though they could not name it. My silence pressed on her like weight. Each second stretched longer, pulling the tension taut across the room. I met the eyes of a man at one of the front tables, his smile gone, his brow furrowed. He looked at me as though waiting for something, as though he already suspected what others did not. I let the moment breathe, gave it time to swell. Around me, the grand hall grew smaller, the air thicker. The scent of roses turned cloying, the champagne bitter. Every detail sharpened, every sound cut deeper. Laura tilted her head, still smiling, but her eyes betrayed irritation. She had expected me to crumble, to vanish in shame, but my silence had become louder than her laughter. She shifted her weight, touched the groom's arm as though to anchor herself. He shifted too, glancing at the priest, his confidence thinning. And in that fragile pause, I felt the storm build. I did not speak. I did not move. I only waited, knowing the moment was near, knowing the air was about to split open. The silence that hung over the room felt heavier than any laughter could ever have been. Guests shifted in their seats, their polished shoes scraping faintly against the marble floor. I could hear someone cough in the back, awkwardly, as if trying to fill the emptiness. The priest stood poised, his hands resting gently on the open book before him, his eyes scanning the crowd with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the tension building in every corner of the hall. Laura still smiled, though the smile had hardened, brittle as glass, her gaze darting from face to face, searching for reassurance. She leaned closer to the man beside her, the one dressed as though he owned the world, but the stiffness in his jaw betrayed the unease he couldn't mask. I watched him closely. His shoulders were tight. His grip on Laura's hand looked more like restraint than affection. The guests, who only minutes ago laughed freely, now whispered behind raised hands. Their curiosity grew louder than their laughter had been. They were beginning to sense the undercurrent, the secret running just beneath the surface. I could feel their eyes flicking toward me more often now, questioning, unsure, and still I remained motionless. I wanted them to stew in the quiet, to let doubt gnaw at the certainty they had so quickly embraced when Laura mocked me. Her voice, once sharp and bold, rose again, but this time it cracked. "Are we really going to let him stand there all night?" she asked, forcing a chuckle that failed to spark more than a few nervous giggles from her circle of admirers. "This is a wedding, not a charity event." She tilted her chin high, but the confidence behind it faltered. The priest raised his hand once more, and even her laughter died. His eyes settled on me for a brief moment, and then shifted back to the book. The groom cleared his throat, trying to appear steady, but the sound echoed far too loud in the hushed space. He looked at Laura with a fleeting glance of doubt, as if silently asking her a question he had been too afraid to voice until now. I let my gaze drift across the room, taking in every detail. The chandeliers above, their crystals swaying slightly as though even they sensed the unrest. The flowers lining the aisle, once radiant, now seemed suffocating in their excess. The music, faint and distant, felt misplaced, a song too sweet for a moment so sour. And then my eyes met Laura's again. For a heartbeat, the air froze. She wanted to see defeat in me, But what she found instead was a steady calm, the kind of calm that unsettles more than rage ever could. Her lips parted, then pressed together again, as though words had slipped from her grasp. Around her, the bridesmaids shifted uncomfortably, exchanging wary glances. The guests at the nearest tables leaned closer, whispers growing louder, sharper. A question spread among them, a question they dared not ask out loud. Why was he here? Why was he standing so still, so certain? The priest cleared his throat again, and the sound cut through the murmurs. He lifted his eyes from the page and spoke slowly, deliberately, his words carrying the weight of ceremony. Marriage, he began, is not merely a bond of love, but of truth. It demands honesty, faith, and respect. His voice rolled through the hall like distant thunder. Each word pressed harder on Laura's face, stripping away the mask she had worn so easily before. The man beside her fidgeted again, his eyes fixed on the priest now, as though bracing himself for a storm he couldn't control. My hands remained at my sides, my posture unbroken. I felt every gaze lock onto me, curiosity hardening into something sharper. Expectation. The air in the hall grew electric. The quiet wasn't just silence anymore. It was the sharp intake of breath before the strike of lightning. Laura forced another laugh, brittle and quick. Father, maybe we could skip the lectures? We all know why we're here. Her attempt at control only made the cracks more visible. The priest did not answer her. He closed the book gently, his hands folding over it, his eyes now fixed not on her, nor on the man beside her, but on me. A ripple of unease spread across the room. People turned their heads, whispering louder now, no longer afraid to let their doubts show. The groom's knuckles whitened as he clenched his hands together. I could almost hear the pounding of his heart from across the room. Laura's smile vanished completely then, and for the first time, she looked afraid. She glanced between me and the priest, her breath quickening, her composure slipping like sand through her fingers. I stayed where I was, silent, letting the weight of the moment build, letting every second tighten the tension like a drum stretched too far. The hall held its breath. Something was coming, and they all knew it, though none of them dared to imagine what it would be. The air in the hall seemed to stop moving altogether, as though even the chandeliers above had frozen mid-sway. The priest's voice carried in a low, steady tone, and with each word the weight of the moment grew heavier. He looked across the room, his eyes lingering briefly on Laura, then the man at her side, before finally turning toward me. The pause that followed stretched until it felt unbearable. Then he said clearly, "And now we call forth the true groom." The silence cracked like glass. Dozens of heads turned toward me at once, and a wave of gasps rippled through the hall. Laura's face drained of color, her lips parting in shock, her fingers clutching desperately at the man beside her. He recoiled, confusion flashing across his features as though he himself had been betrayed. The priest's words echoed, filling the room with a certainty that no one could question. I did not move at first. I let them all look, let them see the man they had laughed at, mocked, dismissed. Their eyes widened, their whispers sharpened into frantic murmurs. I could feel the shift in the air, the disbelief mixing with realization. Slowly, deliberately, I stepped forward. Each footfall echoed in the hall like a drumbeat. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a path without a word, their eyes fixed on me as though compelled. I passed the tables where moments ago I had been the object of ridicule, and I saw the guests lower their eyes, unable to meet mine now. The bridesmaids clutched their bouquets tighter, uncertainty etched across their faces. And at the end of that path stood Laura, trembling, her entire body betraying the fear she could no longer hide. She shook her head, whispering under her breath, "No, this isn't possible. This isn't happening." The man beside her snapped his gaze toward her, his voice rising, demanding answers, but she gave him none. The truth hung between us all, undeniable, unshakable. I stopped a few feet away from her, my silence still stronger than any words I could have spoken. The priest's declaration had done what I had waited for, what I had prepared for. Now everyone saw her as I had always known her. Not the radiant bride she pretended to be, but the deceiver exposed under the harsh light of truth. The groom-to-be, if he could even be called that, released her arm as though she were fire, his expression darkening with rage and humiliation. He stepped back, leaving her stranded in the center of the stage she had built for herself, the stage now collapsing under her feet. She turned to me then, her eyes wide, pleading. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Please, don't do this." But I did not need to speak. Everything had already been said without a single word from me. The crowd had turned, their sympathy drained, their admiration gone. Friends who once cheered her now looked at her with disgust. The man she thought she had secured walked away from her without hesitation, his footsteps heavy with betrayal. She reached for him, but he did not look back. I saw her knees weaken, her hand trembling as she clutched at her gown, her breath shallow. She tried to force a laugh again, tried to mask her panic, but no one joined her this time. Her performance was over, and the silence from the crowd was more brutal than any laughter. The priest cleared his throat, his eyes still on me, waiting for me to take my place. I did not rush. I let her feel every second of that isolation, every ounce of the emptiness she had created for herself. When I finally moved forward again, it was not with anger nor triumph, but with a calm certainty that cut deeper than any outburst ever could. As I passed her, I saw her crumble, her shoulders collapsing inward, her eyes wet with tears that now meant nothing. The power she once held had evaporated, leaving her a shadow of the woman who had mocked me so proudly only minutes before. I took my place beside the priest, and in that moment the hall erupted. Some gasped again, some whispered frantically, others simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process the turn their evening had taken. But one truth remained clear to all of them. The man they had dismissed, the one they had mocked, was not the fool. He was the one standing where she believed she never could be replaced. She turned her gaze back to me one last time, her voice breaking as she mouthed words no one could hear. Perhaps it was an apology, perhaps a plea, but it did not matter anymore. The distance between us was no longer measured in feet but in worlds. The ceremony continued, though for most it was a blur. Their eyes remained fixed on me, on the silence that had become louder than any declaration. And as I stood there, unwavering, I realized that revenge had not required anger, nor cruelty, only patience. The truth had done the work for me. Laura remained alone, abandoned in the crowd she once commanded, her dreams unraveling thread by thread, and I walked forward into a future she could no longer touch. In that moment, she understood what she had lost, and I understood the power of restraint. I understood that silence, when wielded at the right time, could roar louder than the cruelest laughter. Subscribe, like, and leave a comment if you want to hear more stories where silence turns into the loudest victory of all.